Welcome to the Clemson Dubcast. It is Monday, December 30th. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, all that. Last week was a very busy week at TigerIllustrated.com, and I'll just say this week going to be a busy one as well. The player retention part is basically done for Clemson's football program, and now Dabo Swinney turns his attention to decisions on staff. We've been keeping our subscribers abreast of all that, and certainly we will continue to. The defensive side of the ball, certainly under the microscope, so stay tuned to TigerIllustrated.com for all the intel there. My good friends Blake Smith and Brooke Archenhold have been part of the podcast since the beginning, way back in August of 2018. They have an accomplished team of personal injury attorneys at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold based in Greenville. They are Clemson people, and their skillful attorneys have decades of experience in complicated litigation matters, taking a special interest in medical malpractice, nursing home abuse and neglect, car accident cases that have left the individuals involved in serious trouble. For a free consultation at Parham, Smith, and Archenhold, call 864-990-4581 or online at parhamlaw.com. That's PARHAM law.com. When you're ready for a complete renovation in your home or business, open the door to more with Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Their local experienced team will totally transform any room space, from beautiful floor coverings to construction to finished details. Harris handles every step of your renovation process, whether it's a kitchen or living room or an industrial or educational setting, like some of the positively stunning work they've done at Clemson University. Go to discoverharris.com and experience a total renovation transformation from Harris Home and Harris Commercial. Solero Communications, formerly known as Tandem Payment, is a full-service integrated electronic payments provider powered by leading-edge technology. Solero provides a wide array of merchant solutions, simplified payments. They make onboarding, taking payments, maintaining risk management and compliance, and getting support quick and easy. At Solero, they're all about helping you achieve sustainable growth as a business. Taking payments isn't the only thing your business needs. With Solero's solutions, you can manage inventory, sell products and services via social media, schedule staff, track sales, get reports, and much, much more. Find out more about Solero at solerocommerce.com. That's CELERO commerce.com. All right, we've had some positively awesome interviews over the last year, so we'll commemorate that with 2 episodes featuring our favorite snippets. Today, Brad Scott and Jeff Scott, the father-son coaching duo, Mike Noonan, as he came off his national championship, second in 3 years last year. Billy Donlon, the assistant under Brad Brownell, who has quite a story. And then finally, Thad Turnipseed, who probably needs no introduction to most of y'all.
For both of you, there's a difference between, hey, we can do this. We can be a good staff. There's a difference between that and this thing could be national championship type stuff. Whichever of you want to answer this first, do you remember when you started thinking, oh, this thing could be it's headed to being a true powerhouse?
And I would say from the very first conversation, I remember when on that October 13th, 2008, I remember when he called me, it was around lunchtime, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm down here at Firehouse Subs getting subs for the defensive coaches." He said, "Come on back to my office." So I went back there, and he told me what had happened and told me he was going to move me from graduate assistant to coach the receivers for the rest of the year. And he said, even though people on the outside don't think we're going to get this job, we're going to get this job. And I remember right there, that was just hearing his optimism and belief in it from the very first time, talking to a GA. He's just happy to be moving into a full-time role for the last 6 games. That stuck out to me, that he really did believe from the very beginning, when on the outside, you don't, have a coach that's been in place for whatever 7 or 8 years and then want to have a change. You don't just go hire a position coach and call it a day. That's very not normal, if you will. But so I noticed that right away. But I would say, there's obviously being around him every day and learning and seeing. There's a couple moments, obviously, from a football perspective. I think the win against LSU in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, that was really one that I kind of consider as that first big win on a national scale, where you're like, okay, we're coming, right? That whole deal. So that would be the feeling there. And then I would go back, to another story that's not maybe just directly about Coach Swinney, but I remember when Chad Morris came to Clemson, and we had a lot of success in his first year. And Chad and I became very close. We worked, together and around each other every day. And when Chad got an opportunity about, 3/4 of the way into that first season, he gets contacted during the season by a coach that was out of coaching, very popular coach that was going to be taking a big-time job soon. And he was offered a really big raise. And again, I think we're only like 8 or 9 games into that Coach Morris's first season. He told me about it, and I said, well, good luck, because I can just tell you right now, the Clemson I know is not going to be able to match that just from a salary standpoint. And it wasn't 2 days later, Chad signed a huge 5-year deal, over $5 million. And, again, that was, Coach Swinney and Terry Don. But that was for me being around Clemson for so long, that was a big moment like, oh, okay, we are serious about this thing. We are willing to invest what it takes to keep the best, coaches. And then that just led into the whole facilities and all those. So those were like 2 moments maybe from a big picture perspective where I went, okay, this thing's about to get serious. But also, I remember before, I guess it would be before the 2015 season when we lost to Bama in the championship game. I remember Coach Swinney saying, hey, I have a feeling I believe we're going to play Alabama for the national championship.
Wow.
He walked in the offensive staff room one day during fall camp and said that. He walks out. We're like, okay, well, we know what you're thinking about. We're sitting here trying to figure out, how to get a first down on, short yardage situation. But he just had a vision and belief and instilling that in not just the players but also the coaches. And it was awesome to. I would say I did not consider myself a pessimist or a major optimist. I'll probably consider myself more of a realist, if you will. But I've learned through my 12 years with Coach Swinney the power of having that positive mindset and the power of belief. And I saw how that literally was one of the main foundation pieces to him changing the overall thought process and belief within the Clemson football program.
Yeah, just to tag on to a couple things there. It didn't take long for Coach's enthusiasm and energy not only to be infectious among our players, but also in recruiting. The stories that you hear about him, well, first as assistant, the C.J. Spiller. You saw that. You saw things that you said, hey, this guy's got a nice little demeanor about him. Let's say people like him, they trust him, they believe him. But he sold that vision. If you ask Coach this question, Coach Swinney, he'd probably say, from day one, that was my vision, And, you've heard him tell the story about the first year when he went before the Board of Trustees, and they said, hey, we just want a program, that'll be respectable, We'd just like to be able to, and then they mentioned a few teams that, we know we're not where Georgia is and this, that, and the other, and I guess, first year or something, he said, no, I want to be the team that y'all talk about. We're going to beat the Georgias. We're going to, beat the Florida States. We're going to beat. And so he had that confidence. But I think the years where all of a sudden the 5-star kids started coming to Clemson, and it's kids recruiting kids back in those days. The staff was very important, and, of course, the head coach was the most important. But I just know when players came to Clemson, they kind of caught the enthusiasm, the energy, the belief. And then they started coming, and, you just started seeing the Sammy Watkins and the Deshaun Watsons, and I don't know, just you name them, they were starting to come. So the assembly of some great players, and then with Coach's constant in front of the team talking about success. He's a master motivator, and those pre-practice meetings that he had, some are very short, some are a little longer, but he always had a message for the team about belief, and it was always positive. Whether we're climbing that mountain, we stuck this flag in the ground, you know all those stories. But if it needed to be, he wasn't scared to, put that film on from Saturday and say, what is that? That's not our effort. He held kids accountable from the stars right on down to the old boy that was just happy to get in the game. But, he changed that mindset. But yeah, it goes from the coach to the players, and then the players in the locker room then they began to have a standard and an expectation, and the guys that came in began to follow them, and that's when you have the great seasons and the great teams, and somewhere along the way, those just kind of came together, and I think the same thing's going to happen in the future.
Can we dig into Sammy Watkins' recruitment? You knew him not as a ninth grader?
Yes, I was told about him when he was in the ninth grade. So, he was from Fort Myers, Florida, and I'd always recruited because my hometown was Arcadia, and that was about 40 miles north of Fort Myers. So from the early 80s when I started at FSU, that was kind of part of my recruiting area. The state of Florida is what we hit the most, and so I had the panhandle all the way to Jacksonville down to Daytona, but that little area for Fort Myers, Bradenton, Sarasota, and what they call the Heartland, a lot of tough rural country boys, So I took pride then in just establishing those relationships with not just future players maybe and families, but with the coaches as well. And so Sammy's a retired Florida coach that had been very successful as a head coach and all. His name was Joe Hampton, biggest FSU alum and fan you've ever met. So he's coaching. He's just helping out a program down there, and South Fort Myers. And he said, "Hey, there's a little ninth grader." He was JV coach. He said, "Hey, there's a little ninth grader here that's pretty talented. You need to know who he was." So I remember writing that name down, and so I said, "Okay, Sammy Watkins." You couldn't contact the underclassmen at that time, but so I go to the jamborees back when they had jamborees, and even as a young player, I said, he got a little something special. So along the way, using coaches' contacts and visiting with them, and then the coach, the high school coach, would tell families and all. So Sammy's stepdad called me maybe prior to Sammy's junior season. And so you can take those calls if they called you. And so he began to say, "Oh, yeah, man, I'm the biggest FSU fan. I followed the team. I know your career there, and I know, whatever, when you were coordinating offense and won the championship and, Charlie Ward and all this other." And I said, "Hey, sounds like you like me." "Yeah, well, yeah, I said, "Well, guess what? I'm the same guy. I'm just coaching at a different school. So I want you to kind of learn all you can about Clemson." And back in those days, the guidelines for getting into school were probably a little more challenging than they are now. And so those core classes, you had to have so many math, so many English, all that, and then you had to have a minimum test score. So just beginning to work with Sammy's guidance counselors and folks and trying to help them, making sure that he was in the proper classes and doing the things that needed to be done. And maybe somewhere along the way it was attend summer school to replace a grade, just all the creative things that you do to help a youngster. And that kind of helped be part of the difference there, because when everybody kind of figured out that, hey, this guy might be the best player in the state that year, and all the in-state schools and people trying to move in. But I think it was that foundation that we had with him that started way back, maybe in the ninth grade, of just sending that questionnaire. That's about all you could do at that time. But then being involved with their life over those next couple years. And then Chad came in that year. Jeff was the receiver coach. He's visiting with them. And then, that was just kind of a special time. Coach Swinney, was awesome with them. And, we didn't expect, there's so many Sammy stories, and Jeff, he was recruiting some great receivers too. And I said, well, there's something pretty good about this kid. But he's in Florida, and you didn't have his video. I think it was just reel-to-reel stuff. I said, no, this kid's pretty good. So he came to camp. I'm down there coaching we're going through those 2 hours and a half of camp drills while they're up there playing pass, scale, catch, and doing all that. They having fun. That's the other thing with offensive line coach. Football camps, I don't miss them one bit. But I think there was a water break, and Jeff came running down there and said, "Hey, Dad, I think you're right. This kid is something else." And, things happen. And before you know it, he's starting as a freshman. And I think the fun thing, too, we love to tell the story, his very first touch at Clemson was shaking a touchdown, and it was just the beginning.
And we had several big-time wideouts that we were recruiting that year, and Sammy, being down in Fort Myers, he couldn't get up to Clemson, so he hadn't visited where a lot of these other guys had. We got to know them, but Dad would always come in like, "Hey, I'm telling you, this Sammy Watkins, he's going to be the real deal. And we'd put his video on, but his high school tape looked like it was video recorded out of a blimp. Like the players are like super small on there. You couldn't really see. You could see him move around, but you couldn't really tell, how special he was. And so I think his first visit was to camp going into his senior year. So he came up, and you could tell in the first, of course I was like, oh my gosh, this guy looks like a running back. He's 6'2" and filled out, and we did a couple drills, and I could tell, and I've put all these receivers that would come through Clemson over, my 12 years there, I put them all through the same drills, so you can kind of notice the ones that separate, and just how fast he was. I told him, I think one thing I told him was after about the first 15 minutes working with him, I'm like, man, you're like a 15, 16-year-old kid whose dad gave him the keys to a Maserati. You're flying, but you got to learn how to kind of control your body a little bit. But the combination of speed, acceleration, and hands, he just caught everything. The other funny story that I don't think has been told before was so during that camp, after that camp was over, we brought him up to meet with Coach Swinney in Coach Swinney's office. And so we're sitting there, and Coach Swinney's kind of going through his talk, and Sammy, as a recruiting coach, I'm like there to make sure Sammy's listening and everything's going well. Sammy's kind of listening, but he's just kind of looking through a pro press guide that's on Coach Swinney's little, coffee table desk, and Coach Swinney's trying to make sure you're listening to me, kind of going through it. And after Coach Swinney gets done, about 20 minutes, he looks at Sammy, says, "Sammy, you have any questions about any of that?" He looks up and says, "No, sir, but I'm coming." And Coach Swinney said, "What?" Sammy said, "I'm coming." So, "You're coming? What does that mean?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to commit. I'm coming." He's like, "Really?" Looks to me like, "Are you sure? Like, is this good?" I'm like, "Yes." And, a lot of that was the foundation of what my dad was just talking about. And, going back to, the best coaches are the ones, and that's why Coach Swinney's such a great recruiter, because when he was on the road as an assistant, he was able to develop relationships. But what my dad just described, that relationship that he had with Joe Hampton, during all the years my dad was coaching at Florida State, and Coach Hampton would come up and my dad would clinic and talk to him, that relationship. Well, now here it is, whatever it was, 15, 20 years later after all that, Coach Hampton picks up the phone, has, what coach is he going to call? And he calls my dad, who happens to be at Clemson. And if you heard Sammy and his mom and stepdad, they'd say, "Hey, Coach Hampton said Coach Brad Scott's the guy that we need to play for, so that's what we're going to do." That was literally how recruiting was, back at the beginning. But I think that relationship and trust all the way through kind of helped. But it was really funny that but here's what I also would say about Sammy. Some of our best players at Clemson were the most low maintenance. And from the time, and Coach Swinney and myself spent the next hour trying to be sure that Sammy understood that if he committed, he couldn't take any visits, he couldn't go anywhere else. And now he had really just risen where he's going to be, one of the top players in the state of Florida. So we knew what was coming. And Sam was like, "No, I know this is where I want to go. I'm good. I'm not going to take any visits." And he didn't. He went back, had a great senior year, didn't take any visits, and we had no issues whatsoever. He came, but a lot of times the guys that are the low maintenance guys in recruiting end up coming to be the low maintenance guys whenever they're with you, and then the other can be true as well. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. He committed pretty quickly right there, and then he was loyal all the way through. But that's what was fun for me, being able to go back to Florida and recruit during my 12 years at Clemson. A lot of the same areas where my dad had recruited for all those years prior, and just like that one story of Coach Joe Hampton, all these coaches had stories about my dad and how he always took time for them, made time for them, and was always around as a recruiter back in the Florida State days.
You were responsible for signing not just Sammy, but Martavis, Mike Bellamy as well. This is after a 6 and 7 season.
Shaq. People forget about old Shaq. Also, he was pretty good. He was in that class too.
After a 6 and 7 season, after a Meineke Car Care Bowl loss to South Florida, people are like, "Wait a minute, something has to be going on here that's not up to snuff." So, I had a source close to you tell me that the NCAA came asking questions.
Yeah, you were the only one questioning that, right? So I think it just comes down to, again, to give Coach Swinney the credit. He was. We had just come off not a great season, and everybody was a little bit down. And he stood in the locker room. Jeff remembers after that CarQuest Bowl and said, I firmly believe, the next 10 years of Clemson football will be the best in the history of this program. But those guys we recruited there, they all kind of had their own story. Martavis was an unbelievable athlete, one of the fastest kids ever. And he was tall like a gazelle. He could catch and run, and he was from a little small school and very similar. Lived with his mom, but they both lived with the grandmother. So the grandmother was the kind of the one there that, you knew you get close to her. Then, and it wasn't just for that, but that's just how you recruit. She was a factor in it. And so very similar as far as grades and getting in the right classes. Not that they couldn't do the work. They just maybe was still new to guidance counselors too. Every year they were tweaking it. Now we were up to 16 core classes, test scores, and getting the kids prepped for tests, making sure they were getting tutored by people at the school, working with the math teacher, getting them to the test, making sure, when I say getting them to, just calling, hey, test is more. You got, because there have been some no-shows sometimes. So that, and then Mike Bellamy, he was another 5-star. All he did was break all of Emmett Smith's high school records. And the fans that remember Mike when he was here that season, he was unbelievable, so fast and fluid, natural. And so the story behind that one, again, I was from Arcadia. So Mike was going to school in Punta Gorda, which is 20 miles from Arcadia, had a really good program. And he lived and was being raised by his grandmother. Well, it just happened that his grandmother was in my high school class. We graduated together, Miss Ernestine. And so, I'm putting these pieces together, and I'm saying, hey, this is going to shape up pretty good too, possibly. Let me get in there. And so we knew each other, of course, going to school together. So there was a trust factor there. And the high school coach there was named Binky Waldrop, and he had been there in Punta Gorda for a long time, and I recruited a lot of his players. And so there was a little, and Binky knew that Mike was going to maybe need a little bit of, guidance and direction, and he was confident in me and comfortable. So the stars just kind of lined up, and we pulled it off. But then, it was like not long thereafter. I'll tell you one funny story. But I did get a chance to meet with the old boys from the NCAA and thought, well, I got nothing to hide. But you begin to like what they get you phone records, they get everything. And there's certain people you couldn't call. But I had this little day timer that I kept, and I'm kind of my wife. She said, quit giving me lists. I'm not one of your players, but just meaning that the days when I recruited, I wrote down which school and what player, and so I had a backlog from spring of that year all the way through. And I think that was really something that the NCAA said, hey, this is all, because you're getting turned in from doing all kinds of things, from, too many visits, too many phone calls, buying them meals, doing this. But I knew that I had not done that. And so meeting with them, though, when you walk in that room, there's your compliance director, there's your faculty rep there. The athletic director's office is there. The NCAA boy with his coat and tie on and his microphone and an attorney. And I'm like, hey, I didn't need all this. All I remember doing is going back to the coaches and saying, hey, be detailed in your recruiting and in your reports. And, we had all that. And it was just a one-time meeting, and all that went good. But I had to tell this part of the story. So that, since you brought it up, so we get Sammy, he's 5-star. We get Mike Bellamy, he's 5-star. And they're both from Florida, and probably 1, 2, or 3 top players in the state. So Urban Meyer's the coach at Florida then, right? So Urban kind of comes out and makes a statement. I just don't understand how this Clemson can come into our state. Oh, and to add a little caveat there, Sammy's half-brother was a starting safety for the Gators.
Jalen.
Yeah. And so Urban's not real happy about this, and he said, I don't understand how this Clemson program can come in here and recruit the top 2. He was kind of insinuating that maybe we weren't doing things above board. So I just laughed about it and said, well, I've heard that before when we were at Florida State. I think the old coach at Florida back in those days was somebody everybody in this state knows now, and he'd make the same statements about Florida State, how they keep signing these top classes. So, but the funny thing with the Urban story was that later he kind of retired. Remember that year he was working with ESPN, doing
11.
Color.
11.
The next year.
Yeah, next year.
So he's doing color for the ESPN and all that. So he had about 2 of our games right in a row or something, but I think it's maybe even the first one. He's up there, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but, seeing the atmosphere in Tiger, the Tiger fan base was just going wild. It was Clemson at its finest, and he said, I used to wonder how in the world could Clemson recruit these top players, out of Florida, but now I see why. This is in one unbelievable place. And I think it's one of the quotes that's up in our football facility.
Yeah.
Was an Urban Meyer quote. No, nothing. I forget exactly how he said it, but that's what he said. Now I see. So that was kind of fun for me to hear that.
The other 2 funny things talking about the NCAA coming and having interviewed Dad. So Mike Bellamy's aunt was in an a car accident, and so she got a little settlement of maybe $2,500. And so this is about his senior year after he's committed to us and all that. So she brings the $2,500 by the high school when she's picking up Mike and shows it to Mike. And Mike says, I want to take a picture with it because that was, would be pretty cool to have that. So he takes that picture of him holding that money. And boy, everybody, all the Florida fans and everybody, boy, that got to the NCAA real quick. And then Kenneth Page was another O-lineman about the same time. And these are like within a month of each other. That Dad had signed out of AC Floor in Columbia. Kenneth is in California visiting his uncle, who his job was to fill up ATM machines. And so he's in the car, and he's got, all these $100 bills, and so like both pictures show up in about a month, and that's when the NCAA came in. But I looked at it honestly as like a huge compliment to Clemson to be able to recruit guys, do things the right way when everybody on the outside is saying there's no way that you guys are doing it the right way. And I know people are spelling Clemson with the money sign and all that with the S. And but yeah, those were kind of just odd things that happened that kind of didn't look good on the outside. But we knew we could definitely sleep easy at night when you did things the right way.
Hey, golfers in the Clemson, Seneca area and upstate. I'm longtime friends with the folks who run Lighthouse Restaurant on Kiowee, and they've come up with a splendid new idea, the Lighthouse Kiowee Sip and Swing, a freestanding golf simulator and sports bar and grill. So not only do they have the great main restaurant, the lake favorite Dockside Cabana, now you can go get your golf game on inside Sip and Swing, which also has full bar and limited food menu, 4 golf bays, and it's all powered by the Golf Zone indoor golf simulator, 14 TVs to watch games from the deck, the bar, and the golf bays. Also, special offer just for podcast listeners, 50% off simulator bay rental for 1 hour, 1.5 hours, or 2 hours for first-time booking. If you go to lighthousekiowee.com or call 864-985-9523 and use the promo code DUBCAST50. And a quick update here on December 30th. The promo is going to run out on January 7th, but you can book up until then and still use the promo and book for dates after January 7th. Again, that's promo code DUBCAST50. So this is a great deal and a great idea from the Lighthouse at Kiowee folks. So with a figure like Dabo, who's been around here a long time, who's from the South, just a couple of states over, his life story has been chronicled quite a bit. But you having you weren't from here, but the story of your father, your brother, I mean, pretty amazing. And I don't know that you're really asked about that a whole lot, but just your background. Your father went to MIT, the Harvard Business School, worked on the Apollo space project, helped modernize Taiwan's rail system. I would really love to dig into some of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I didn't get the the mental capacity that my dad has. He was probably the smartest guy I ever met, and sometimes let you know it, as dads do. But he grew up his mother passed away when he was younger, and my grandfather raised 3 boys, and all very, very strict. And my dad wound up studying engineering at MIT, and then going to the business school at Harvard. And then I can remember being down in Florida, and this is where my love for sports came, is that we lived in Jupiter, Florida, and Bob Shaw was a major league pitcher who lived across the street from us. And he pitched for the Mets and the Giants, and had a good career. But my dad and Bob Shaw became pretty good friends, and Bob Shaw had 3 daughters, and I had 3 sisters, so I had 2 sisters at that time. And so he would come over and get me and play catch with me, and he would send his 2 daughters over to play with my sisters, and my mom would watch them so that they played the halls or whatever the girls did. And that was my love for sport, and I can remember watching Bob Shaw on black and white televisions pitch in the majors, and that's why I fell in love with sports. We went. My dad became a consultant, a management consultant after the engineering gig down in Florida, and he was working in New York, and we moved to Taiwan because the rail system in Taiwan was going to be outdated by the superhighways they were putting in. And so my dad's job was to, because he had an engineering background, modernize the rail system in Taiwan. And so it was a state or government appointed position. And we lived on the same street as Chiang Kai-shek. And when there were state dinners, my mom used to be jealous because you have to take the number 1 son. And so I was 10 years old, and I kick and scream because I didn't want to put a tie on. I didn't want to go, and they were long, and this, that, and the other thing. And but the most valuable experience of that time was that I started playing soccer. And when we moved back to the States, my parents purposely sought out a town that had a strong soccer program because my brother and I had both started playing overseas. And so we moved into Westport, Connecticut. Lo and behold, I created a monster. My dad became the president of the Westport Soccer Association. And my brother went on to play at Duke, win the national championship. And he is now the commissioner of the Canadian Premier League, which is the first division professional league in Canada.
And how old is he?
He's 4 years younger than I am.
4 years.
So he's 56, 57.
Your father also worked on the merger of the American Football League with the NFL?
Yeah, I left that out too. Pete Rozelle was at my house having dinner. So yeah, that was another one of his consulting jobs. So when the AFL and the NFL were separate entities, my dad helped. He and Hadley Ford was the other guy who was on that project, and Booz Allen Hamilton was the consulting firm. And yep, Pete Rozelle, and I became a Joe Namath fan because Joe Namath did things his way.
What else do you remember from that?
Not much. I was young.
Yeah,
I was really young. I just remember that there were, times that my dad had meetings, but he was writing reports and crunching numbers and doing those types of things. And occasionally, like I said, there was one night when Jim McKay. You remember the announcer Jim McKay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jim McKay from Wide World of Sports. He lived in Westport as well, but Mr. Rozelle and Mr. McKay were at the house, or it's kind of surreal. And like I said, I grew up. My passion became soccer, and I wanted to be a professional anything in sport. And my passion was soccer, but the only reason why I really wound up, I want to be a wide receiver, and you had to be 72 pounds in order to play PAL football in town. And I went to the scale, and I was 70 pounds, and so they wouldn't let me play. And my parents, again, kicking and screaming to the soccer field, and they never came off. And so that's, I had incredible parents, and I'm one of 5 kids, and we were always doing something. And soccer became the center of our universe, other than academics, as we went through our teen years and into college. My sister played college soccer, my brother. So.
Your father also had a pistachio farm in Argentina?
Oh, yeah. That's what he did when he retired. He bought a pistachio farm in Argentina. I'm telling you, he was a savant. He could get into something and research it, and would be the smartest. Incredible. And Leonardo da Vinci had the same talents. Was probably a little bit further along than my dad, but my dad just, he was really, really, really bright. And my sister and my brother probably got that side of the family, and my mother was pretty athletic, so I got that part of it.
His trained tenor voice was heard in opera and choral performances. Yeah,
he could sing too, and that used to be a lot of fun. We would get the neighborhood Christmas caroling, and my dad sang, and a bunch of things that I went to when I was growing up. But the thing I remember the most is we would have to, it's kind of like the Trap Family in The Sound of Music. We start rehearsing like December 1st, and it would be every night. And, with the 5 kids and my dad, Christmas caroling. And then we go out on the street, and we wound up having friends and family come with us. And that was Christmas Eve back at our house when we got done for clam chowder and something to drink.
Your mother, she was an avid Red Sox fan, so you and your brother were Yankee fans, right? My whole family. My dad grew up in Needham, Mass, and my mom in Rutland, Vermont, and they were huge Red Sox fans. And when we moved back from Taiwan, we moved to Westport, Connecticut, which is 50 miles outside of New York City. And my grandfather took me, because he was a season ticket holder at Fenway, and he took me to Yankee Stadium to watch the Red Sox play because it was closer and easier. So when they came down to visit, he took me to my first game, I think. I don't know. And it went silent at the start of the national anthem. Robert Mel singing the national anthem. And no, I was younger then. This is before we went to Taiwan. I was 6, and maybe 7. And Mickey Mantle took off his hat. He was playing first base at the end of his career. And I screamed out in the silence, "Gramps, look, Mickey Mantle's bald just like you." And Mantle turned around and winked at my grandfather, and we were like 2 rows back next to the Yankee dugout. And they did the infield, and he came over after infield, instead of tossing the ball in the dugout, he came over and gave me the ball. And that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. And I became a Red Sox fan. I became a Yankee fan then and there. And my grandfather turns over in his grave because he turned me into a Yankee fan that one moment. And then I corrupted my brother. And so we're Yankee fans. Everybody else in my family are Red Sox fans. What do you remember from the 86 national title that your brother Mark won at Duke? It was their first national title in any sport. What do you remember from that?
Yeah. It's funny because I was playing professionally at the time, and I didn't get to see him play. And he tore his ACL in the quarterfinal of the tournament, so he didn't play in the semifinal or the final. And that's all I remember is that my brother had gotten hurt. And I don't know where I was at that point. It might have been in Dallas or someplace, and my parents called me and told me that Mark had gotten hurt in the quarterfinal, and then later that week, we've got the news that he tore his ACL, and that was that's what I remember of Duke winning the tournament. And then there are pictures, that I saw that of Mark being part of the celebration when they did win it. He was right in the middle of the group, and but yeah, and John Kerr, who's the current coach at Duke, who's one of Mark's teammates from that '86 championship team. So John and I always have great memories of their team and my brother, and John was one of the first to call and congratulate us when we won it.
Can you give any insight into what his job is like as the commissioner of the Canadian Premier League?
Yeah, he's only been doing it for a couple of years, and it's basically Major League Soccer back, 10 years ago. So they've got 8 clubs up there, and Mark basically, he's just gotten in the news for they separated from their media rights partner, and Mark's had to make those decisions. So the job entails the business side of the Canadian Soccer Association, which is the national teams, as well as being the commissioner for the professional league. And he's trying to grow the league. He worked at the MLS offices for years as well, so he's got some experience in what he's doing. But it's every day, trying to get the quality of the league higher, whether it's working with each individual club or like I said, getting the media rights. We know in professional sports that's the most massive part of monetizing your sport, and so I know that he's heavily involved in that right now.
I'm sure you've had opportunities to coach professionally, and I would guess that it takes a pretty strong pull of the college game and where you are, this pull from Clemson, for you to be happy here and to remain rooted here. Can you help me? Can you illuminate on the pros and cons of the differences between the two? I guess the most dramatic differences between those two jobs, professional and college.
The biggest difference, hands down, which is why I love what I do here at Clemson, being a college coach, is the impact you can have on other people's lives, right? And you do that every day. And Usman Silla, is just one of hundreds and hundreds that I've been able to help, and through the game of soccer, but really through education and sport. And there's no amount of money that can give me that type of life satisfaction in the professional game. Have I wanted to test myself a little bit? Do I have ambition? Sure. But again, it's the daily impact you can have on young people's lives as they go through a really critical period. And I think we do it holistically really, really well here at Clemson. And I coached in the Ivy League, and that was, I still think, a little antiquated in that it doesn't balance properly both education and your other interests. It's heavily weighted to the education side. I've coached at the University of New Hampshire, and it was underfunded, the athletic department, which was good because you had to find ways to get things done. I've coached at Division III school. I went to Division III school, and the purity of the, I think you've probably read the book, The Amateurs. That's what it is. So I've had an enriching experience through my life, and all I want to do is help other people have that same enriching experience. So or a better one. And you really don't get that opportunity in the pro game.
Can you think back to when you first got a call from Clemson and it's, Mike, this is Kyle Young from Clemson University. Am I doing a good? I can do a good Terry Dunn, but maybe not. I need to work on my Kyle Young.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Kyle called me in October, and my season at Brown was still going on, and I politely declined to talk to him until I said, if you can wait till the end of the season, I'd be happy to talk to you at that point. But right now I'm involved with with our season, and I said, I know that your search is ongoing, and you may not be able to, and fortunately they did. But my greatest memory was coming down for my interview. And I walked in the room, and it was Terry Don, Billy D, and Kyle. And they each shook my hand, and their hands enveloped my wrist. I mean, they all had big lineman football hands, right? And I'm going, whoa. And they sit down, and Terry Don looks at me, and he goes, Mike, nobody on this side of the table knows anything about soccer. He said, that's why you're here. He goes, but everybody on this side of the table knows a lot about Clemson. That's why we're here. I'll never forget it. And, through the process, I was also being interviewed up at Syracuse University, and was actually offered the Syracuse job 2 days before the Clemson job. And so now it was time to bring my wife to visit both places, and Debbie was going to make the decision, and we were driving to the airport. And I said to Debbie, I said, is there one orange you like better than the other? And she said, I like brown, because her family was from Rhode Island. She didn't really want to move. And we visited both places. And, I thought that she would want to stay up north closer to the family and whatnot. And we came down to Clemson, and Debbie was out visiting the Montessori school where our kids met. And Terry Don drove me to go meet Debbie, and he had no idea where the Montessori school was. He goes, Mac, this is out of my element. And he dropped me off, and we flew back, and I said to Debbie, I said, what's it going to? She goes, I just like Clemson better. And so that's why we're here.
Billy, I've spent a couple of hours listening to interviews you've done in the past. And I've got to say, as much as I've enjoyed talking about basketball, your life story is really remarkable. And I don't even know where to start. I guess we could start when your grandparents came over from Ireland. You're a second generation American. That's correct.
Yeah, I am. I'm really. As you get older, Larry, you learn how meaningful that really is. You learn if you knew my dad's story, which I really didn't know through childhood. He didn't talk about it much. I learned it much more as an adult, and I learned it a lot when we lived together. When I took over at Wright State for coach, after my second year, my third year, I hired my dad as operations. And, for people who don't know, it wasn't nepotism. My dad is one of the best basketball coaches that nobody will ever, the public won't get to know. He was a great high school coach. He went to Providence College. He was an assistant for Joe Mulaney. And then Patino, he's the one that assembled that 87 Providence Final Four team with Billy Donovan and all those guys. Those were all my dad's recruits. Then he went to Northwestern to be Bill Foster's assistant, the former coach at Duke. And he's still, I give Chris Collins a hard time. I'm pretty sure this is still accurate. The last first-round draft pick out of Northwestern was recruited by my dad, Evan Eschmeyer from New Knoxville, Ohio. Tremendous coach. So we lived together. My mom had died in 2010, so this was 2013. My mom died of triple-negative breast cancer. And it was during that time I learned so much about my dad. He had a major, major, major speech impediment growing up as a kid, like awful, really bad. In a time, in the 50s and the 60s where, speech pathology and where we are now isn't where we were then. And so it was really hard. He got thrown out of high school as a freshman. And my grandparents, who, again, they came over to Ellis Island from Ireland. And they found the money to send him to a boarding school in Rhode Island, and it changed his life. And he fell in love with basketball, being a New Yorker. That's what kids did. They, on one street, on one block, the Irish lived, the Italians on the next block, the African Americans on the next block, the Hispanics on the next block, and everybody met at the playground. Some guys played handball, some guys played stickball, and a lot of guys played basketball. And you learn so much playing pickup basketball. And he fell in love with the game, and he went to junior college in Iowa, and then got a scholarship from there to RPI, Richmond Polytechnical Institute, which is now VCU. And he would play in the league, he played against Earl the Pearl. And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but I think the point will be made. He had like 37 on Earl the Pearl, but Earl the Pearl had like 55 on him. So I tell my dad, hey, when you tell that story, just tell people you had 37 on Earl the Pearl. You don't need to like give Earl the Pearl his numbers, but it's pretty good. So he could really shoot it, but he's an amazing father. Been really blessed, to have him. And then my mom's side, my grandfather was a New York City police detective for 25 years. He was an Irish tenor. He sung the national anthem at Yankee Stadium. He played baseball and basketball at St. John's. But my favorite just side thing about my grandfather, in order to make a little extra money, he would do bodyguarding on the side. And when Liz Taylor and Alfred Hitchcock would come to New York, they would request my grandfather. Alfred Hitchcock was actually in my grandparents' apartment. So I always found that fascinating. And then I growing up, I started watching all the Rear Window and North by Northwest and a lot of the Hitchcock movie. It made me kind of a Hitchcock movie fan.
And I'm not a historian, but my understanding, the biggest migration from Ireland, of course, was the potato famine. That's 1800s. Your grandparents were obviously later than that. Were you told the story of why they came and what the circumstances were, and then where they lived in New York?
They lived in Queens. So they lived in Sunnyside, Queens, and Rockaway, Queens, which is, Rockaway is right off the water, like Bell Harbor and in that area. And my grandparents also came because of famine.
Oh, okay. Same. And then you said your father was thrown out of high school because of the speech impediment, mainly just because there was.
He won't give me that detail. I don't know what he did. It certainly was on him. He's probably going to get mad that I put this is out in the open. But his freshman year of high school, he did some things. Nothing like. I think he was not going. He was cutting school, is I think what happened, and. Eventually, so he was going to a Catholic high school, I think it was in New York, and they moved him out, and my grandparents certainly didn't give up on him, and said, you know what, they sent him to I'm blanking on the name of the school. I used to know it. It still exists, Mount St. Charles Academy, Mount St. Charles, and it's kind of militant in its background, and that really helped my dad, really helped him, and that's where he went for 3 years. And my father is as organized and detailed a person as you'll find. And you'd never know, Larry, if you talk to my dad, that he ever had a speech impediment to the degree in which he had it. It's really remarkable what he's done with his life as a first generation, and my dad has two siblings. Well, my uncle passed away, and then my aunt, and all three of them were college graduates. So think about that. Your parents come over, they immigrate over, and all three become college graduates. My aunt is a nurse practitioner in New York City, and so just really been really lucky with the family that I was born into.
Why do you think it took so long for him to share with you the history?
I honestly don't think it was intentional. I think, we talked a lot about the coaching side of it, his career as a high school coach in Long Island. Like when he was in Long Island, Bob McKillop was a coach in the league. And Ralph Willard was a coach in the league. So those three guys. And that's why I tell you, my dad's as good as anybody. He just made a bad decision with his career. But it's funny. I'll tell you, this is one of my favorite stories. And it wasn't even my dad that told it to me. So about 10, 11, 12, 13 years ago, I was sitting at a summer game watching a kid play with Coach McKillop. And he's like, "Hey, how's your dad?" And I knew they coached against each other. I think my dad was at a school called Maria Regina, and I think Coach McKillop was at Holy Trinity, and Coach Willard was at St. Dominic's. And one of Coach McKillop's best players of all time was Matt Doherty, played in North Carolina, and as you know, and so one of Coach McKillop's best teams in the playoffs was upset by my dad's team. And on my dad's team, his point guard married Coach McKillop's sister. Okay. And so Coach McKillop was like telling me this story, and he goes, "Every Thanksgiving, I got to listen to my brother-in-law tell me how your dad out-coached me, ran circles around me when they upset my team." And first of all, think about the humility with Coach McKillop, sharing that story. But we just had stories like that, that we talked about. And, and so I did not know. I knew about his time at Mount St. Charles, but I did not know about why he ended up going there.
So he was at Providence. I guess he got there in '82, and you said he recruited basically the whole team that ended up going to the Final Four in '87. He left the year before the Final Four season to go to Northwestern?
That's right. They lost in the Elite Eight in the NIT. So Coach Pitino's first year, they made an immediate turnaround. Elite Eight right away. In fact, I'll never forget it. Matt Palazzi missed a baseline jumper. I was a ball boy. If he makes it, they would have gone to the Final Four, the NIT Final Four. And my dad's a real loyal guy. And Bill Foster. My dad used to run Coach Foster's camps in the Poconos. Coach Foster had camps in the Poconos, and he's a great coach and a great man. And, when my dad was coaching high school basketball in Methuen, Massachusetts, it was early 80s, and our economy was really struggling. And so schools in Massachusetts, the public schools, they had to riff some teachers. And the way they did it was the teachers that had been at the schools for the least amount of years in each department. So my dad was a history teacher, but he'd only been at Methuen for like 3-4 years, maybe 5. And he was the lowest ranking history teacher by years on the totem pole. And so he got let go, and he was out of a job. And Joe Mullaney was the Providence coach, who actually was Coach Larinaga's college coach. So Coach Mullaney led Providence to a Final Four in the early 70s, then became an NBA coach, and this was his second stint back at Providence. And back then, Larry, there were only 2 assistants. You only had 2 assistants. You didn't like all the amount of guys we have now. I call it the hallway. In the hallway, it's incredible. It's why the game has evolved the way it has, is because you just have more people that can get more work done, sharing ideas, collaborating. Back then you only had 2 assistants and the head coach. And so Coach Mullaney had an opening, and Coach Mullaney didn't have, he really only had 1 or 2 guys in college that he talked to. And one of them was Bill Foster, was Coach Foster. And so when Coach Mullaney called Coach Foster said, "You need to hire Bill Donlon. You need to hire my dad." And that got my dad the job at Providence. And he worked for Coach Foster, I think, for 3 years he worked for Coach Mullaney, I think, for 3 years or 4 years. They got let go. My dad, there's the famous camp, the 5-star basketball camp that was started by Will Klein and Howard Garfinkel. My dad was one of the original workers. And back then, 5-star was everything. Coaches, Bob Knight worked it, Pitino worked it, Hubie Brown. I mean, the amount of guys, Coach Krzyzewski, the players that went through 5-star, Ewing, Jordan, everybody went through it. And so, my dad was one of the original guys at that camp, and that helped him because it gave him some credibility. It helped him in recruiting. And so when they got fired, when Coach Mullaney was let go, they hired this young up-and-coming coach from Boston University in Rick Pitino. And Coach Pitino keeps my dad. Again, there's only 2 positions. And I think it actually gone up to 3, but so Coach Pitino keeps my dad, and they had this amazing turnaround. And, part of that story, and this is another story, is, Billy Donovan was transferring, and my dad had a great relationship with Coach Donovan and with Coach Donovan's parents, his mom and dad. And when they hired Coach Pitino, my dad convinced the Donovans, hey, this is the guy. Stay here and play. This is going to be great. And Coach Donovan will tell you to this day, like that, them listening to my dad's advice obviously worked out tremendously well for everybody involved. Coach Donovan has a great career, leads Providence to a Final Four. Coach Pitino, his what he's accomplished is well documented. So, but why I share the Coach Foster part, and it's played a role in my life. My dad's decisions has played a role in my choices. Coach Foster becomes the coach at Northwestern after that first year at Providence under Coach Pitino. And Coach Foster calls my dad and says, I need you. I think we can win here. And up until Chris Collins, Northwestern is like, it's a trap door. You go out there, it's a beautiful campus, it's on the lake, there's great people, and everybody thinks you can do it. But nobody was able to do it. And, my dad went out there, and there was a couple times where they were close, but they didn't get it done. But he left. He left on his own, and, Providence went to the Final Four the next year. And I tell people all the time, that next year you were able to add staff members. So the guys on the staff, when my dad was there, the GA was Herb Sendek. My mom, obviously Coach Sendek wrote it, but my mom typed his thesis. Like young people listening, what do you mean typed it? Yeah, you didn't have computers back then. You had to write it, and then your rough draft would be your handwritten copy, and then you would either type it yourself or give it to somebody to type for you, which is what Coach Sendek did with my mom. And the other people on staff, Stu Jackson, who's now the commissioner of the West Coast Conference, Gordon Chiesa, who became the coach at Providence, and then went on to be with Jerry Sloan with the Utah Jazz for like 20 years, and then Jeff Van Gundy. And I tell people all the time, and this is a biased son, Larry, but I tell people all the time, I'm not saying my dad was the best of those coaches, but I promise you he wasn't the worst. And when you look at all those people's careers, really pretty amazing. And so, in our profession, if you make a bad decision, it can cost you everything. And that's what happened to my dad. And that's why, I spent 8 years with Coach Brownell, and I knew how special he was. And I had opportunities to leave, to go from a 1-bid league to a multiple bid league as an assistant. And I never left because I never wanted to leave. I knew how special Brad was. And I learned that through my dad's poor choice. I knew that if you're working for somebody who's really special, don't leave them and it'll pay off. And certainly in my career, that's happened.
What was it like living in the Chicago area from in the late 80s, early 90s, when the Bulls are doing some rather important things with some guy named Michael Jordan? I had to have to imagine those were pretty formative memories for you.
Oh, amazing. And I grew up we basically moved to Northbrook, which is one town away from Deerfield. And Deerfield's important because that's where the multiplex is. And it's a sports club. The multiplex was a sports club, it has all the fitness exercises, free weights, and it had a gym. And it's where the Bulls practiced. The Bulls practiced at this place called the multiplex. And here I am, this 14-year-old kid. I would go into the multiplex, shoot, play pickup, and then I would occasionally watch practice. And one day, Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen took me to lunch. And I didn't tell my mom, so I wasn't old enough to drive. And I was so excited when they invited me to lunch because I was around all the time. I was there every day for multiple hours a day. And, the Bulls players, I never really got to, really talk to Michael, but all the other guys were great to me. And one day I'm in there shooting, after the Bulls finished practicing, and Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant come out of the locker room from showering, and they come back in the gym, and they're like, "Hey," I don't even think they knew my name. They're like, little fella, you want to come get lunch?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to." And so we go get lunch, and but I didn't. My mom was supposed to pick me up at a certain time, and I just totally forgot about it because I'm like, "Holy cow, I'm getting ready to go to lunch with Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen." And so go to lunch. They're great, and they drive me home. There's 2 police cars outside the front of my house because my mom thinks I've been kidnapped. Because I was like 3 hours late from when she was picking me up, and there weren't really cell phones back then, so it was hilarious as I'm getting out of the car. You get my mom, and but I had I was really blessed. My childhood, I was really lucky, and to be in Northbrook, I had an amazing high school coach in Brian James, who was also Chris Collins' high school coach. I've been around some great coaches. I was really, really lucky. I've been basketball has been very, very good to me.
John Shire played at the high school too, right?
John did. Yeah, John, Chris, and I all there. And, Chris was, tongue in cheek. When I left Kansas City to come here, Chris was like, "Man, don't do that." And again, tongue in cheek, because it would have been pretty special to have 3 guys from the same high school all be Division I head coaches. That probably doesn't happen very often at the same time. John was taking over for Coach Krzyzewski. Obviously, Chris was at Northwestern, and then I was at Kansas City. So, it's really pretty amazing what Glenbrook North, our high school, has had a ton of Division I players since Chris. He got it started for sure. And basketball in that town is, I don't want to say it's a religion, but it's pretty significant.
Can you give your take on the endless argument on today's NBA players versus back in my day, back in our day, the 80s and 90s? I don't know, not that my opinion matters, but I don't know, maybe the right take is there are some guys who would be from that era who would be perfectly fine in this era, and there are some guys from this era where it would apply as well. What's your take? It just seems like such a different game now with the number of players 6'9" and above who are now basically point guards and face up 3-point shooters and creating. It just doesn't seem there were that many guys back in those days. That's sort of my awkward way of.
I think that point is very true. There are bigger, more skilled, taller guys that are more skilled. The back to the basket 5-man it's not non-existent, but it's an endangered species for sure in our game. But what I do take issue with is I'll name one of the Bulls teams. So Michael Jordan, Ron Harper, Scottie Pippen, and Dennis Rodman. Those were 4 of the 5 starters. There's not a team in the modern game that can say they were more athletic than those 4 guys. Even if you want to take that great Golden State Warrior team, Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are not more athletic than any 4 of those guys. They're not more athletic than Jordan. They're not more athletic than Ron Harper. They're not more athletic than Dennis Rodman. People sometimes, I think it's good to remember when the Pistons, the bad boys, used to beat the Bulls, Dennis Rodman guarded Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
People like as great of a rebounder as Dennis Rodman was, he was also an elite defender. So I think athletically, I don't think the guys in the 90s were behind today's guys. I think the game has changed for sure. I think the skill level, the shooting, some of the analytic things, and also, to be fair, the way the game is called has totally changed. And there are those differences. But I think the guys that played in the 90s could very easily play and excel in today's game. And a great discussion would be, I actually heard Shaq and Draymond Green I listened to their podcast driving. I was driving from Birmingham to Atlanta over the weekend recruiting. And I listened to that podcast, and, Draymond's like, yeah, we would kill your teams because you can't guard the pick and roll. And it was Shaq's like, well, who's going to guard me? And, so it was great. It was a great conversation.
Upstate foodies, want to take a moment to talk to you about our favorite taco spot, Willie Taco. 5 locations across the upstate. This award-winning team has been serving up fresh taco fusion for a solid decade now. The chefs at Willie Taco utilize the freshest, most creative, and sometimes unexpected ingredients in their kitchens. Come see why Southern Living, Garden and Gun, and Food and Wine Magazine are raving about Willie Taco and their signature offerings, such as their Southern Tide, crispy avocado, Nashville hot chicken tacos, literally flavors you will not find anywhere else, folks. And don't forget about the cocktails. Super fresh margaritas, ice cold cerveza, and over 80 tequilas served up daily from behind the bar. So don't wait, folks. Your Willie Taco Familia is ready to serve you up their twist on funky fresh fusion. It's the Willie way. Another loyal supporter of the Dubcast is Blackacre Law Firm in Greenville, a subsidiary of Parham Smith and Archambault. Blackacre helps South Carolina residents achieve their dreams of home ownership by providing experienced professional representation for real estate closings. Attention to detail is crucial in real estate law. Blackacre is committed to making sure nothing gets by them preparing residential or commercial closings. Blackacre also offers estate planning services for their clients in the Greenville area. Find out more about Blackacre at 864-326-3507. Want to share a quick word about Founders Federal Credit Union? If you've been to a sporting event in Clemson, you've probably heard about Founders already. They are the official credit union partner of the Clemson Tigers. In addition to that, all Clemson faculty, staff, and students are eligible for membership as well as IPTAY members. Its office is located beside the Walmart Neighborhood Market on Old Greenville Highway in Clemson. For more information, go to foundersfcu.com. You got here around the same time that Radakovich
Yeah, sure did.
got here. Mm-hmm. And, of course, one of his big initiatives was the facilities, improving the facilities and actually investing and spending. It seemed like they were so fiscally conservative previously, just sort of holding on to the savings account, so to speak. Right. What do you remember? Because I guess my point is it wasn't just football. It was this bigger vision of renovating the basketball arena and all the stuff that has happened over the last decade.
I'm a huge Dan fan, so I know most people are. There's always, like I said, anytime in that spot as an athletic director, you're going to have enemies because every decision you make is going to offend somebody. Somebody didn't want to spend $60 million or whatever we spent on basketball. Somebody didn't want to do whatever. So there's hard decisions, but he made them. He made what he thought was best for Clemson, not what looked best for his resume all the time. And he was very intelligent, had great vision, and I think he was, and Graham Neff too, together, because Graham was right by his side. And I loved working with both of them because it felt like here, whether it was Alabama or Oklahoma, it's you got your athletic department and then your sports. And that's how most people are everywhere. But Clemson's unique that we're between Dan and Graham, and of course Graham learned a lot from Dan. It's just more of a oneness here. So that's what made both of them unique. And I think when you have that, you kind of have the pulse of what everybody really needs and talk about, other than your facility guy telling you what you need. You're hearing it straight off from your coaches, and you're part of it. You're living it. You see it. So it's an easy sell and easy conversation between each other at that level.
You mentioned that initially it wasn't about facilities.
No.
It was about the programs, nutrition, social media,
Social
the
media was the
branding.
big one. The whole, the first thing we did here was, it's funny, like he started calling me, his director of recruiting happened pretty quick. And I said, okay, I guess I'm director. And I always helped in recruiting, but mine more was logistics at Alabama. And then I kind of helped with the social media at Alabama when it first started. But back then it was still kind of new, but still mine was more like infrastructure. So I would learn things in my role as I was a director of events, facilities, and capital projects, and major gifts. I had a lot of titles at Alabama, so I worked with people. But so I kind of saw what was happening. So I come here, and I remember that. And, of course, Jeff Scott was passionate about social media when I first got here. And I didn't have a Twitter account, Facebook account. I had nothing. And next thing you know, I'm starting. I remember vividly going over to talk to some people in the athletic department about we need these graphics. And I was told we don't have that major on campus, and we couldn't do it. Well, we literally sent some students out to put on the billboards on campus if you want to work in football and you have a graphic communication skill. And that's where some of the leaders in college football came from. Austin Gaines, Max Huggins. They came from a flyer. So we get them in here, and next thing you know, a lot of this was dumb luck. And people started loving what we called what Clemson Tigers, Clemson FB. Yeah.
Yes.
And started loving it, and we started doing some fun things, and it's funny to watch Dabo. Dabo was very hesitant, but now he's bought in totally. But he had to just prove it and see it. The next thing you know, it's taken off, and they see the value. We hired Jonathan Gant, who's a rock star, and he takes it to the next level. Helps me. I had all these ideas, but didn't know how to execute the ideas. Yeah, I can force things and get us to where we were for those couple of years, but he took it to what it became. Put some structure around it. We hired some people, some infrastructure, got more athletic department help. It wasn't just all in the football building, in the recruiting office, and that boom, that was born. And then so that's born. That goes with recruiting, and then we started talking about the whole elite recovery, nutrition. Brent was big on pushing me on nutrition, and we were just basically buying food from Airmark, and players would want to eat it. And of course, Dabo's so positive; he thinks everything's great. So he thinks the food's great. What are you talking about? I said, Dabo, nobody's eating it, and So we got through that. So that kind of the building allowed us to have a new partnership. It's still Airmark, and they were great partners, but we brought in our own staff, our own chef. We raised the food budget, and we worked with them to more like and Graham Neff had a lot to do with this, put the whole cost plus model together with them. And now people all over the country are trying to copy that model because it's the most efficient way to really feed your student athlete. So, and then of course, Jeff Davis and James Trapp were rock stars. I'm sitting there and I'm watching all these kids every day constantly. This is the old West End Zone, coming in, talking to Jeff all day. And so we were doing the Paul journey, but we just hadn't branded, hadn't talked about it. So I said, hey, Dabo, this needs to be the front door of the football building. And we need to brand it. And we went and got with Carter McIlvain and some of the marketing kids and for about 1 or 2 semesters and told them, laid it out, the plan, and they helped came with all the branding ideas. And of course, Jeff's a phenomenal leader. He took that and made it what it is today. And so a lot of things were just living it and seeing how it worked. And of course, then we knew we had to get better in the sports science world, in the elite recovery world. And we had that young guy named Alex Bina. He's sitting there. I didn't know who he was. Everybody thought, who's this guy charting things at practice? And Dabo sends me all, hey, we got to get better. That's my story. We got to get better. So I started visiting all these schools in the country. And Jeff Allen in Alabama gave me a lot of great input. To be honest with you, that's where a lot of the ideas came from, was from Jeff. And he sent me to different schools and said, talk to this guy. Again, we came back and we kind of put elite recovery and sports science together. And that was kind of, again, just dumb luck. And then Alex is sitting over there, who I never would hire Alex Bina. And Dad said, oh, no, we're hiring Alex Bina. I said, all right, we're hiring Alex Bina. And now he's like, and he's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that's just Dabo knowing people, and that's his gift. And so now he's one of the leading people. The kids love him. And so, like, a lot of these programs, you're just seeing it, you're building them as you go and what's needed. And, of course, the building gets people here. That's what the building doesn't, the slide. All that slide was totally Dabo's idea. You know, I'm thinking, okay, I'll put a slide, you're the boss. But you know what? People talked about the slide all over the country when it first came out. Now, we had kids who want to come just to see the slide. And then when you're here and you have that goodness about you and you have those parents that see what college football should be, then you fall in love with Clemson. And so that's kind of how it all came about.
Cost plus model. What is that? You mentioned with the
food and nutrition.
Yeah.
So before I say we're going to charge you, I'm making up the numbers. I don't know, $15, and we're going to do the best we can. Well, now we say, hey, let's look at it different. If you're not worried about buying a steak that costs $15, and we're willing to, and we know we're willing to pay that. Well, then we'll hire the staff. We'll hire our chef. We'll pay for whatever that is. And hey, we want better food, better quality food. So, and now our chef that works for us is kind of overworking with Airmark, but it's not about the bottom dollar. And for Airmark, they're a great company, but they gotta make money as well. So now you say, okay, we're going to take that pressure off of you, whatever it is. Hey, if we spend $100, we're going to pay you 17%. You're going to make $117. So now they're comfortable. They're not losing money. They're not worried about the cost of the food or the quality. And like I said, I don't want people to say, we were fine. We're eating the same food every student eats, but there's a cost benefit of any company that you got to make a profit margin. And like I said, they became some of our greatest partners. One day, that's a whole nother podcast. Each of these subjects we're touching on is a whole podcast in itself to really get to the bottom.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to skim it and give people a little bit of the vision.
What was Dabo reluctant about with the social media stuff initially? Was it just like going behind the curtain?
He still doesn't have going behind the curtain, what's going to be put out. He wanted to prove every single thing before we did it. So that went through for like 6 or 7 months. Really, the whole time I was kind of in charge of it. he never truly had 100% confidence in it. Although, I remember the fun stuff we did one summer with the Red Bull and Brenton and the construction. I think that became so popular with the fans, and the realness of that. And to me, that was some of the best stuff we did. But then, so that it was just a progression. So he became more confident, and then he became very confident in Jonathan Gant. Jonathan has a great deal with people. He's not talented in his job, but he was a great communicator, and he very trustworthy. So I think those two things just growing together took time, and now he's totally bought in and saw the benefit.
I mean, before you got here, DJ Gordon and a few of his,
that's right,
in the equipment room, they were, I forgot what the app was. I forgot the name.
In the equipment room, we looked at it and said, why aren't we doing this? And they were the first ones to come in when it was still over in football. DJ was the leader. And so then I always try to put things in place and get out of the way. So then we kind of dumb into DJ. He was an equipment manager. He comes in and he's already doing it with the equipment room, equipment Twitter feed. And so then you marry that with the access of football because the trust that DJ had, with Dabo had with DJ. And then you bring Jonathan in together, and then it just, boom, took off. Mm-hmm.
With the Reeves Center, Dabo Land, whatever you want to call it, it's not an easy sell.
Yeah, right.
Because, I mean, the West, again, the old way of doing things, right? You had major donors who were like, wait a minute,
old,
I thought you said the West End Zone was our forever home, and now we want to go across Perimeter Road and do what?
Right.
I'm just, how do you sort of politically, strategically lay that out? I think even Bill Hendricks, Dabo flew down with Bobby Couch down and sat on his back porch and said, I'm your best shot, and you're my best. Pretty much is what he said.
I don't remember Dabo. Probably, I know he doesn't forget anything. He knows the dynamics better than I do. But what I knew coming in was, although West End Zone was nice, the structure was nice. It didn't have the square footage that was needed. It was multi levels that you had to get an elevator to move players back and forth. It was on in the locker room, and then we're on 4 floors up, and just logistics of time, the 20-hour rule, how that plays. And then the big thing was just the practice fields. And Dabo had envisioned of the practice fields being in lot 5. And then the West End Zone, you can kind of make it work. It's not near, but he will. So when you do that, of course, you can start showing people what the most efficient buildings are, the Bill Hendricks of the world, the trustees, the president. You start educating them, and that's kind of where I help give Dabo the education of, hey, show them this. And it's not as hard of a sell as you thought when you saw what it could be and you painted that picture. Communication, vision, like anything else, and most people buy into the right thing.
Do you recall about when the idea was when y'all first started just talking about the concept of the Reeves Center?
So we opened it was not, like I said, it was not. I was not hired to be part of the Reeves Center. I was not. So I was 13, 14. I think as soon as we got here, and Dabo was smart. Like, he knew what I seen, and he would use people's strengths to help him. So it didn't take long for me to start pushing it. And, of course, he's also a human, so he's got 25 different things going on every day, so I can't focus on this thing. So he'd get, hey, Thad, focus on this. You don't have to give me much direction. Hey, focus on this. Give him some ammunition. Of course, Dan was a key role at that time. It wasn't a hard sell to Dan Radakovich. So once he's on board and sees the vision, puts the plan out, it really came about rather quickly because, like I said, I would say, Larry, I'm sure we started talking about it soon after we arrived, and he was talking about it, I'm sure, before I ever got here. But the first year I was here was probably, I can remember, the best of my memory was recruiting department, social media, getting that going and functioning. And so that kind of probably toward the end of that. Now we had this recruiting war room. We kind of did a little bit of remodel there to get somewhat of a player lounge and help out what the Paul Journey was becoming. We remodeled. We were in 3 closets. We remodeled the little lobby area, if you remember, put the Paul Journey, which one called the Paul Journey there, right there by the player lounge and walking into the food. So through that whole process, which was probably year 2 I was here, we knew we had to have something better. And that was probably when we started working on like 14, probably hired somebody in like 15, actually really got serious about it. built it in 16 and moved in 17.
Okay, fun stuff. A lot of stuff in those interviews I had forgotten about. We're going to have another one of these tomorrow, New Year's Eve, Best of 2024 Part 2. So stay tuned. Appreciate the support of our sponsors. Also, thanks everybody out there for listening. Be safe. Cheers.